Hello, welcome or welcome back to Life on the Fringe. Today we're taking a look at some YA LGBTQ plus books. So YA is young adult, so these are books that are written for like high schoolers, maybe middle schoolers, but they can be enjoyed by everyone. Don't judge me. So I wanted to share some with you, especially since so many books right now are in the process of being banned and sexuality is not going to be talked about in schools. I think it's really important that we highlight books that are accessible to young adults, that have, characters that center LGBTQ plus people. Another benefit I feel to reading YA if you're unfamiliar with the community. Young adult novels are usually some kind of coming of age novel. They're trying to understand their sexuality more, or their gender, and come to terms with it. So as a reader, if you are unfamiliar with a specific community or a specific, maybe you're familiar with bisexuality, but you're not as familiar with non-binary people, then you could benefit from reading a YA book that features a non-binary character as their main character, because they're going to explain it out more than in maybe an adult novel. Not always, but sometimes. Also, young adult novels are something that can be shared between parents and kids. So if you're a parent of an LGBTQ plus person, reading a novel that takes place in high school featuring a character that identifies the same as your child could help you relate more to what that child is thinking. Obviously, every character is different, every situation is different, but I like them for that reason. And then finally, another reason I like YA is I think that they highlight some of the issues faced in schools. Typically with adult novels, the characters, like romance novels or mysteries or thrillers, sometimes they'll highlight things like homophobia, or an intersectionality issue, but it will be while they're adults. And YA novels tend to focus on young adult characters, so they highlight a different set of issues than adult novels do. Or if they do, they kind of gloss over, or it's in a prologue somewhere. It just isn't typically the main focus of a book. So without further ado about why read YA LGBTQ plus books, let's just go into a few. So the first one that I want to highlight is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. So George M. Johnson is a Black queer man, and this book is kind of about the intersectionality of those two identities as he was growing up, and how he kind of came into himself, and the experiences he faced. This is a memoir manifesto, so it's nonfiction. But don't let that scare you, because it's a memoir. It's mostly stories about his life, and the people in his life. It's still very easy to read. It's not at all like reading a textbook. I think that's the big fear with nonfiction, is that you're going to be reading definitions and stuff all day. Not the case with this book. I think what I liked the most is are all of the anecdotes that he uses to highlight how intersectionality played out in his life, and how, how homophobia in the Black community specifically affected him, and also kind of the reasons why the Black community has such strict standards of masculinity, and how that ties back to trying to be like respectable in the eyes of white people. And I think it's just very interesting. It's a very good read. It's, as I said, it's a memoir and a manifesto, and I think where it shines for me is the memoir. Telling your truth, speaking your experience. Where I feel like I didn't like the book as much is the manifesto side. There are some issues I had with the generalizations made in the book. Obviously, this is what everyone's entitled, right, to their own opinion. With a memoir, with the memoir aspect, clearly, I mean, that's what happened, and I do think that a lot of them are reflective of larger issues. So I don't take issue with turning it into a manifesto. But, for example, he speaks about schools, and oftentimes school policies are a little bit more nuanced than this book lets on, but it's also YA, so that's not the point. And it's not meant to be a policy book anyway. It's meant to be sort of a we can get through this together book. Be yourself, unlearn, your internalized homophobia, unlearn your internalized racism type book. And I really think this is a great book for either people who identify as Black and queer or for anyone to read, because it's an experience that if you want to be a good ally, you should be reading. So I did learn a bit. I study this topic a lot, so I wouldn't say for me particularly it was revelatory, but if this is your first foray into intersectionality with the Black queer community, it's a good book, again, because it's YA, and it will start you off at square zero. Lastly, the last thing I want to say about All Boys Aren't Blue is it does talk about history and how it should be taught in the U.S. and how the whitewashing of U.S. history classes impacts individuals. This book does touch on that topic, so that would be a topic I feel like this, as a manifesto, did cover and covered pretty well. An example of one that I didn't was about school uniforms. I just think it's more nuanced than the book made it out to be. Not that I'm particularly pro or against uniforms. I definitely see the argument he makes about agency, but uniforms are often put in place because, and not always, but they can be put in place in order to help students who don't have the money for school clothes, so that everyone is equal and they can be provided by the school. Also, school uniforms can make students, put students on a more even playing field when it comes to money, because they all have to dress the same. Of course, I think that in a school uniform, students should be allowed to dress to the gender that they identify as, but that's the other argument, the flip side. Again, not saying I necessarily think we should have uniforms, but that's the argument, and that part is not addressed in the book. So let's say nonfiction isn't your thing. Fiction time. So this is I Wish You All the Best. The main character is Ben, a non-binary character, written by a non-binary author, Mason Deaver. So Ben comes out to their parents as non-binary, and their parents reject them. So Ben is forced to live with their estranged sister, and it's about them reconnecting with their sister, and they're trying to navigate their last year of high school. From the blurb, you may think that this is going to be kind of a romance novel between Ben and a boy at school. However, it is not. Yes, there is a budding romance in the book, but really the book is about Ben, and it's about Ben coming to terms with themselves, overcoming the rejection of their family, building up the courage to come out to their friends at school. It's about the issues that they face as a non-binary person, trying to understand what their style is. It talks about like going shopping and how there are men and women's sections for clothes, and how they're drawn to clothes from both sides of the aisle, and how having the clothing gendered affects them. And it also talks about like bathrooms, but mostly it just talks about like trauma, and it talks about like being brave and being brave enough to be yourself and to love yourself and to be yourself in the world. It's just a very good book. I learned so much reading this book. And this is not my first foray into a non-binary character, but I just felt this book was very well done. I enjoyed it a lot. I was rooting for Ben the whole time. As a romance fan myself, I did pick it up because I thought there would be a romance. I was really looking forward to that aspect as being central to the plotline, but I'm kind of glad it wasn't. So I would definitely recommend this book for everyone. It's a great book, and if you have a non-binary friend or relative, and this is the first time that you're being asked to use the pronouns they, them, I think reading this book will help you, because it shows you how to use they, them properly, and it puts it in your head more. So it's a great book, and I do think that people would relate to it. I can't speak for non-binary people, so I don't know how helpful it would be for a non-binary person, aside from the fact that as a bisexual, I know that when I read bisexual characters into books, even if their experiences are different than mine, it is so nice to just see an aspect of myself represented in media. And you know, there are always parts that I can find to relate to them, and so I think it's important to see yourself in media. So I do feel like this book will be liked by non-binary people, especially since it's written by a non-binary author. Then I read the Passing Playbook by Isaac Fitzsimons. I'm so sorry. I'm butchering these names. This book focuses on the main character is a trans black boy who likes boys. So a gay black boy. Trans boy. And he was basically had to leave his public school because at the public school his life was threatened because he came out as trans. In this book, he decides, it starts with the first day of school at his new private school, which is a progressive school, and he is going to go stealth. If you aren't familiar with what stealth is, basically it's where you just identify as a boy and you don't tell people that you're trans. Going stealth can be a way for people to stay safe, and that's kind of what this book gets at with, you know, when he was out, he was threatened. Now he's going to go stealth because he's transitioned and he passes. So this book is a pun, basically, because he's also on the soccer team, and then he's very good at passing the ball. So it's very good. It's very clever, the title. But this book deals with a lot of issues around the trans community, specifically in schools. The largest one that it focuses on, the largest two, really, but the one that's on the cover and the one that is in the blurb, is the way that it, like him being on the boys' soccer team. And this is very poignant because right now there are bills going up to vote on whether or not trans kids can play on the teams they identify as. And I think this book does a really good job at the importance of being able to play on the team that you identify as, and the importance of camaraderie in sports. So it's very relevant. So I would really recommend reading this now, especially if you're wishy-washy on the issue or you want to know more. I think this book does a good job, and it's fiction. Like, it's not a preachy book necessarily. It's more a case study. And if you don't know anybody who's transgender who plays sports, this could be your insight if you're looking for that. The other main character in the book is another boy, and they kind of are maybe flirting, maybe not. But he comes from a religious and very homophobic family, whereas the transgender boy, his family is very supportive. So you kind of get to see how family affects students as they're in high school, and the importance of having a supportive family and how that can play out when you don't. It's just very good. It's a very good book. Now, that being said, it's YA. One of the things I personally didn't love about the book was how much they spelled things out for you. That's where, to me, it could get a little soapboxy, but it's YA. That's part of it. They tend to be a little on the nose sometimes. That said, I felt like the characters were very relatable. You're rooting for them the whole time, and I thought it was very realistic the way that the parents and the transgender kid interacted, because even the supportive parents had moments where they weren't the best allies because they were trying to be too protective. And everyone's coming from a good place, but the messages that can send, the miscommunication between our main character and his parents is just very realistic to the experiences of people that I know, where there is love and there is acceptance, but there is still miscommunication. I felt like that this book did a really good job of showing how that can happen, especially for people who are expecting rejection. So yeah, and then, like I said, the main debacle, besides the playing on the sports team, is whether or not he's going to stay stealth or if he's going to come out as transgender in his new school, even though he passes. And I think this book did a really good job of explaining that in a very nuanced way, the pros and the cons of coming out, and emphasized the point that is very true. Don't come out if you are not, like, physically, emotionally safe, psychologically safe to do so. Take care of yourself first, then worry about the rest. I think this book did a really good job of talking about that issue, and I think that's a very relatable issue for passing trans kids, but also transgender kids in general, and also bisexual people, because they're often straight passing. It's just a very good book. And then, to emphasize my point about if you've never, like, read a book about a transgender student, I would recommend this one because it highlights so many issues that come up in schools that affect, like, transgender kids. So, for example, like, whether or not to wear an LGBTQ plus pin on your backpack. Is that aggressive or not? Is it allowed at your school? Where to change in the locker rules. Like, your school records. Are they going to have your right name on the record? Or are they going to have your dead name, which is the name that you were assigned at birth that you no longer use? Sex segregated gym classes, QSA meetings, sports bras, passing privilege, going to the bathroom, gender neutral bathrooms, singing, which is just about, like, if you're on testosterone, the way it makes your voice change and stuff. It's just very good. It brings up a lot of things, and if, like, personally, I am, like, close with a transgender boy, And so these aren't the first time I'm hearing of these issues, but I think for many people they would be, or it might be the first time, maybe not that you've heard of the issue, but that you've really like seen it play out in real life. And I think that's the benefit of a fiction book about this topic versus nonfiction, because you're getting to see it through the eyes of a character and how it plays out in their everyday life versus, like a pamphlet on how to be an ally. That's the benefit to me of reading these types of books. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of our content, click subscribe, ding the bell button to know when we post. And most importantly, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!